So I slipped on a pair of these faded kind of pink floral oven mitts and leaned over and opened up the oven and pulled out this beautiful roasted chicken. It was an organic, free-range, heritage breed bird. Free run. Or it had been in life. Now it was surrounded by delicious roasted root vegetables, and the whole cabin was filling with this smell of, wonderful, wholesome roasted vegetables and meat. And I set it down on the sort of kitschy old wooden table and set a place for one, and I sat down and started eating my lunch and kind of looked out the window at the forest and all the fall colors. And I thought to myself, at least this much, I'm nailing it in this one small way. I had been planning this trip for over a year, I guess, at this point. I was doing a 2-week writing residency at a cabin in rural Michigan, in the woods, basically. So I was going to be all alone for 2 weeks just writing. It was something I'd always wanted to do. And I had applied for this thing a year ahead of time and made all the arrangements and had all this complicated scheduling and got time off and, spent 12 hours on various buses from Toronto to get there. And now I was there, and I had a lot of big plans for this trip because it was sort of in addition to being something I'd always wanted to do, it was kind of a reset time in my life. It was had been a period of a lot of transitions. And I had just had, a couple years earlier, my father had died. And I had just, it had been one of the, luckily, few times in my life where I'd really come to understand that feeling that sometimes things just don't work out okay. He'd been sick and it was very brief, and you kind of always think things are going to work out. Sometimes they don't work out. And it was sort of in the years since then, a couple years that I had been moving cities, and I finished grad school. I released an album. There was a lot of transitions. I'd been basically kind of semi-nomadic for a long time. I ended a long-term relationship. So all that to say, it was kind of a time of renewal, and I was really, I guess at that point, I had just gotten a new apartment, and I had a new boyfriend, and now here I was on this trip, on this writing retreat that I'd always wanted to do. So I had a long list of resolutions of things I was going to do with this sort of special time, including, I was going to go down to the river every day and go swimming and do some canoeing and stay off of social media, which by this point in time had progressed past the point where you have only 3 friends and have become an all-consuming monster, as it remains to this day. And so yeah, I had a lot of good intentions. I was going to go for these long, long walks every day and eat healthy food and cook like wholesome, things that I had never done before or since. Such as, baking an entire chicken. I don't know if baking is the right word for what you do to a chicken. Roasting, I guess. It was all new to me. And it was very exciting. So I went in there with the best of intentions, and like all resolutions, I guess, you can sort of imagine maybe where this is going. It turned out you couldn't swim in the river at all. It was completely unsafe, and it was freezing cold. It was fall. And canoeing was not really an option because it was sort of a one-way river. That wasn't gonna work. And I was gonna write dozens of songs per day, and it turns out that was also easier said than done. The internet somehow found me, and Facebook. I would post, ironically, on Facebook about my time being completely isolated from the world. So I was feeling, a little discouraged. I'd been a little ambitious going into it, but I thought this one thing, the eating right part, that was going well for me, and and I was nailing it. And as for the long walks thing, I was I was taking walks in the woods every day, and it was very beautiful, but I was kind of, again, I had sort of ambitions that outmatched what I could accomplish. I'd been really into Nietzsche as a grad student, as you do. And I read somewhere that Nietzsche would take these long, like constitutionals every day for 8 hours. He would go for these epic walks and just sort of, just feel hostile toward his fellow man. So I wanted a little piece of that. And so far the longest I'd managed was like 45 minutes, maybe an hour of walking in the woods. So I finished my lunch, I ate the chicken, and I headed out the door, and there was it was pretty isolated, this cabin. There was like neighbors, maybe just 100 feet away, but you sort of couldn't see anyone. It was in the state forest. And it was beautiful. I walked out the door and sort of basically didn't really have to see another soul for most of the time I was there, and which again was a real part of the appeal as I was seeking to find myself. So I stepped out the door and I was walking down the hill and past the river, as I did pretty much every day, and I went into the woods. And it was just stunning. It was like you could just hear the sound of bird song, and then off in the distance, very faintly, the sound of hunters. There were shots firing, but I wasn't too worried. And I knew there was like a high visibility reflective jacket in the cabin that I was supposed to be wearing, but I wasn't too worried about it because I hadn't even seen another soul in all my time walking around the woods so far, so it wasn't a big concern. And I just walked through this path, and it was like a riot of fall colors. It was so bright and beautiful, and something again about being in that kind of liminal state made me just really appreciate the sounds and the sights. It smelled really good. It was sort of like, it had been kind of drizzly most of the time I was there, but so it kind of that lush, verdant, kind of loamy aroma. And I walked through the woods as I did every day again, and I sort of would come into this big field. I just realized I'm supposed to be using the present tense. Pro tip, you're always supposed to use the present tense. So I walked through the field. No problem. So I'm walking through this field, and it's just like a big opening kind of in the woods, and I wasn't even really paying attention where I was going at that point, just sort of wandering, and I came out sort of the other side of the field, and I saw this big, beautiful, it was just like a log on the ground, but something about it really struck me. It was very kind of half covered in moss, and there were creatures and like a bunch of insects, and it just looked very epic, like this mighty kind of uprooted tree on the ground. I kept walking and was thinking about Nietzsche, singing some songs to myself. And after like about an hour, I thought, all right, I don't think I'm gonna make it to an 8-hour walk today. So I basically turned around and headed home. It had been an hour. So I'm walking back and sort of walked through the field and continued walking as toward the direction I'd come from. And I was walking and walking, and off in the distance I saw a clearing in the woods, and I walked through and stepped out, and I was in the same field. And I realized, oh, this is the same way I came. So I kind of took a different way out. That time I kept walking and walking, and then I saw off in the distance this big log that had fallen, and it was kind of half covered in moss, and it had all these creatures and insects buzzing around through it. And then I realized it's the same log. And so I turned back the other way and walked, so now kind of the opposite direction, and I kept walking and walking, and then off in the distance I saw a clearing in the forest and the trees, and I walked through, and I realized again I was in this field, the same field again. And I realized I was just walking. I realized that I'm walking in circles. And by then it had been about maybe an hour and a half. So I thought, all right, I go back the way that I came, and I started to feel, I was getting tired by that point. but I felt mostly just kind of irritated. I always get lost everywhere I go, and I don't have a good sense of direction, so I basically just turned around and walked back the opposite way again, and I was walking, and then kind of coming up on the path ahead, I saw this fallen log, and I realized it's the same log again. And off in the distance, suddenly again, I could hear the sound of shots of hunters. And suddenly the sound felt a lot more menacing to me. I didn't want to walk toward the shots because I obviously didn't know what I was going toward. Plus, it's kind of impossible to tell what direction these things are coming from. And the whole forest that had been so beautiful started to take on kind of an eerie and not entirely welcoming kind of feeling. So it had been about 2.5 hours, and I just kept walking, and I thought at this point, at least if I can kind of find a road, I could go to a house and sort of knock on someone's door. And even then, I feel silly, because I don't know what I will say at the door. Like, I'm looking for the house with the chicken in it. I don't really, and it doesn't feel in that moment like it's confusing actually, because I'm so used to being lost, but this is like a whole other thing where there's no landmarks, and at the same time I thought, I'm just gonna feel so silly, knocking on someone's door, not knowing what to tell them. So I just kept walking, and then I came up to a break in the woods, and I walked through, and I was in a field, and it was the same field again. And so in a way it's comforting, because I know I can't be going too far from my cabin, but at the same time I don't know how to get home, and I'm starting to get exhausted. It's, another half hour goes by, and I'm just walking. I'm sort of doing that thing, like walking a little faster, but I'm not going anywhere, so it's not serving any purpose, but just making me exhausted. And it started to rain. It was drizzling, and I was starting to get chilly. Actually, the sun was starting to sort of sink a bit lower in the sky, and by that point I was starting to get cold. I was thirsty, and I didn't know what to do. And it occurred to me, I came here, I wanted to be alone, but this felt very much alone. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. I felt like literally nobody knows where I am in the whole world. And even then, I still had the thought, like, it's probably fine. It'll probably just work out okay. But another part of me felt like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to spend the night in the woods, because I can't figure out how to get home at this point. And I didn't know how much longer I could keep walking for. And I just thought, fuck you, Nietzsche. So at some point, another 20 minutes has gone by. I'm going in circles, and I suddenly just bent down, and I picked up like a bundle of sticks and twigs and started laying them on the ground. And I made sort of a line of sticks, and then another line, and another line, and I made myself an arrow so I could remember at least which way I had already gone. And so I went, the direction the arrow was pointing, and I came to another fork in the road, and I made another arrow and laid it on the ground, and, hung a right, and kept walking, and kept walking. And then eventually I came to another sort of crossroads, and I looked down and I saw my arrow that I had laid there, the previous juncture. So, and again, it was confusing. I thought, at least I can't be that far, but I know I'm going in circles. At least I know to go a different way this time. So I kept doing that. I kept walking, and I kept making arrows, and then I would find them again and take a different turn. And again, I'm hearing the shots in the distance, and it's raining a lot harder now and getting a lot darker. And I didn't want to go toward the sound of people, because these people have guns, and there's like no trespassing signs everywhere. And I probably look like a deer. So it had been almost 4 hours. And by then I was feeling exhausted, and I was feeling like maybe it's not going to work out. And I just then suddenly saw something off in the sort of through the trees in the forest that wasn't a tree. And as I came closer, I realized it was a house. And I saw this house, and I kind of kept walking and circled around, and I realized I was in this big backyard of this big house, and there were a couple of trucks parked there. And so again, I was so relieved, but then at the same time, I thought, I'm sort of creeping through these people's yard in the half light, and there's no trespassing signs everywhere, and I know that these folks have guns. The good people of Michigan. And I turned the corner, I kept walking, and then I looked out, and before I made it even to the door, I looked out and I realized I could see the road, and past that was the river, and then just up the hill was my cabin. And it was right there. I had been circling around it within a few, dozen meters all afternoon. And I felt so relieved, but then I felt immediately so dumb. I had been having thoughts like, how sad this new boyfriend was going to be when they found my body in the woods. And I made it home. By then I was really hungry, so I sat down again at the table. And I thought, sometimes I guess things do work out okay. Ate a piece of chicken. This song is called Jordan, and it takes place near a little town called East Jordan in northern Michigan. In the past, I've introduced this song by saying that it's about finding yourself, which I guess that's what that story is about. Too wild and weary slumber, what dreams will come? All night like galloping thunder, night horses on the run. And all through that Michigan forest fell beating right. My voice a lonesome chorus to feed in meter time. And out through that Thank you so much.